Aid agencies have been key to the functioning of Gaza and the survival of its people. As Israel's air and ground war rages on, their ability to deliver food and medicine has been severely curtailed. Dozens of aid workers have sacrificed their lives. How can these agencies keep working in such dangerous conditions? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, before the war, Gaza had already been highly dependent on foreign aid. Now, with so many displaced and near daily bombardments, their difficult job has become almost impossible.
The situation is desperate. Trucks carrying indispensable supplies trickle in. It's a fraction of what was delivered before October 7th and of what is needed now. Before the latest eruption of violence, Gazans lived in precarious circumstances. The Gaza Strip is one of the world's most densely populated areas. The United Nations estimates 80% of Gaza's 2.3 million inhabitants live off of international aid, and about 1 million people relied on daily food support. That figure has grown substantially.
The cost of meeting the needs of 2.7 million people, that is the entire population of the Gaza Strip and 500,000 people in the occupied West Bank, is estimated to be $1.2 billion.
The UN is the biggest provider of aid to Palestinians. In 2021, almost 545,000 children were enrolled in their schools. 1.7 million received life-saving humanitarian assistance, and 1.9 million used their health services. Constant Israeli military bombardments and Gaza's fleeing from north to south has put unprecedented pressure on the agency.
UNRWA, the bulwark, the safety net, the buffer of so many people of Gaza for so many years, is practically out of business. I don't even know the numbers today, this morning. Yesterday it was 72 killed. UNRWA staff, these brave staff.
That number continues to rise, and is the most UNRWA staff killed in a single conflict. When the Rafah crossing with Egypt opened, many foreign aid workers refused to leave Gaza. There's no denying they're needed now more than ever, but at what cost?
Let's meet our guests in Beirut. We have Nour Shawaf, Regional Humanitarian Advocacy and Policy Advisor at Oxfam in Middle East and North Africa. In London, James Denselow, Head of Conflict and Humanitarian Policy at Save the Children UK. And here in the studio with me, we have Mabrur Ahmed, founder of Restless Beings, which is an international human rights organisation with offices in Gaza. Mabrur, I want to come to you first. You are working flat out. You have people on the ground in Gaza, and I understand you have lost one team member already.
Yeah, I mean, we've been operating since the first days in October 7th. About 10 days ago, we lost one of our team members. Her name was Kifaya. She was an administrator. So in the night, her shelter, or the place that she was staying, was bombed. She, along with her brother and sister, and sadly passed away. Other members of our team tried to rescue her from the rubble. Moments later, a second bomb hit. Until this day, their bodies are irrecoverable, so we've not been able to give her a proper final farewell.
What's the impact on your team when a phone call as devastating as that comes through?
I mean, a lot of people have asked us that exact same question. A lot of our supporters have asked us that question. I think the situation is so stark at the moment. For our team members, I tried to give them time off, and there's a depression in taking that time off because it's like a sitting duck waiting for a bomb to fall on you, waiting for the next bombardment, waiting for the next round of attacks. And so they feel most at ease when they're able to help people. But it's a terrible set of circumstances. It's completely unworkable, is the reality. You know, every day I'm managing our team. There's many, many days that go by where I can't reach my team. And it's a knot in your stomach, you know, trying to reach people that you work with every single day, people that you love. You simply can't reach them. Whether that's in a human rights perspective, from a humanitarian perspective. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And this is just from the comfort of London. Of course, it's completely different.
Nour, just spell out for us the enormity of the challenge when it comes to helping the people of Gaza.
The situation in Gaza has gone beyond what we call a humanitarian catastrophe today. People need absolutely everything in Gaza. So we know that more than 10,000 people have already been killed, more than 25,000 are injured, and 2/3 of the population has been displaced. But even in displacement, people are not finding safe shelter. They have little to no food. They have no access to clean water. They need medicine, they need fuel, they need absolutely everything. The basic needs to survive in Gaza are not available today. We have 33 staff in Gaza working for Oxfam, and we have multiple Palestinian civil society partners that are today risking their lives to deliver aid to people in southern Gaza because we are unable to reach people in northern Gaza. In northern Gaza, people are basically unreachable. We have no operations there anymore. Hospitals are run down, and the hospitals that are still operational are going to lose fuel very soon. And if they lose fuel, that means people will also not have access to hospitals.
Nour, in your experience, is this the worst conflict you've ever had to deal with?
Yes, the scale that we are seeing today is unprecedented. It's been a month of continuous airstrikes, continuous bombardment, no crossings have been opened. Even the aid that's trickling in, the trucks, the few hundreds of trucks that have gone into Gaza are not enough. They're nowhere near enough to cover the basic needs, and that's pre-crisis. That's not accounting for the displacement, not accounting for the destruction, not accounting for people people not having anything in the market anymore. Shelves are empty. This is what our colleagues in Gaza are telling us today. They cannot get what they need in order to survive. And that's Oxfam staff, like hundreds of thousands of Gazans today.
James, your charity does incredible work in very dangerous places all over the world. Just spell out for me the challenges Save the Children face now in Gaza.
Well, as colleagues have already described, Gaza is not only the most dangerous place to be a child at the present time, it's also the most dangerous place to be an aid worker. The UN has suffered over 80 members of its staff having lost their lives. It's the worst numbers of casualties for them in their history, I believe. So it's an incredibly dangerous place. There are no safe zones. There's no deconfliction of movement for aid workers to take aid from point A to point B. The amount of displacement is vast. It's over half the population and counting. Every minute that goes by, things get worse. So there's a combination of the unique circumstance and the history of Gaza, a population that was 80% aid dependent prior to the events of the last month, the limitations on the amount of aid that we can get in, let alone the cutting of fuel, water, and electricity, and of course the incredible intensity of violence, the 360 nature of that violence, and the vast death toll, injury toll, and of course the more insidious impacts of people living without clean water and food.
James, I've seen some of your colleagues on the ground in various different places around the world, places like Sicily, the Migrant Trail, for example. But Gaza is quite obviously next level in terms of what you are required to do and the basic, very, very basic resources that you would have to even give children.
Exactly. And again, with 50% of the population children, we like to focus our efforts, obviously, as a child crisis. And we focus on the numbers of children killed. But of course, all children in Gaza have been affected by the violence. They've all seen things that no child should see. Their education has been paused. Their lives are on hold. Those children who've been injured, I was speaking to a medic who was telling us that there's no minor injuries for children in Gaza. These are life-changing injuries, often losing limbs that they will have to live with for the rest of their lives if they can survive this conflict. Because, of course, we're not talking about an earthquake that has finished. We're talking about a conflict that continues and shows every sign of escalating. And that escalation will, of course, weigh heaviest on the most vulnerable.
Mabrur, talk to me about the kind of person who works on the ground in a conflict zone for an aid agency. They must be extremely resilient, driven people. to risk their lives every single hour of the day?
I think, you're absolutely right. I think the situation right now on the ground is such that anyone who's making any effort, be that aid work or any sort of community work, is literally risking their life, right? And it's bigger than aid work. It's bigger than giving some food. It's bigger than, being able to provide some medical support. This is the freedom of people. This is for the existence of these people. So they are seen as heroes within their community. Obviously, we will see them as heroes as well. But it's more than that. These are the people who are literally keeping people alive at the moment. It's a terrible situation to have to run a team where we're trying to find things that don't exist to give to people. People don't have places to sleep. A few days ago, we were talking about not having the body bags to cover the deceased with. These are things that no agency in the world ever thinks that they're going to try and do a fundraising campaign for. We're talking about the absolute basic necessities that simply don't exist. People are going to die of starvation in the next 24 to 48 hours. That's the levels that we've seen. There is no food available on the open market, as Nour mentioned. It is completely reliant upon small organizations like us that are getting handfuls of food to people.
So the Rafah crossing, how important is it that Egypt opens that up and lets in proper aid?
Without question, but the real question is, what is proper aid looking like? Because pre-crisis, we were looking at in the hundreds of trucks per day. I think to date, we've maybe got to 500 trucks in the last 10 days. So it's not only just insufficient in terms of number, but it's a fraction of what was there before. So the restriction of aid is not just because the crossing's closed, it's targeted. It's been designed to reduce even further. And so, of course, what you're looking at is a civilian population who are not only desperate, but now they have no other means. There is literally no survival without this aid. Without question, that aid needs to go in immediately. But how do you get possibly thousands of trucks in when you have a regime hell-bent on not opening that for beyond 50 or 60
Can you
trucks a
see
day?
it changing anytime soon?
From a political position, absolutely not. Israel seems hell-bent on continuing what it's doing. The world needs to wake up. That's where the pressure needs to come from. We can talk about humanitarian pauses as much as we want, but as James referred to as well, we're talking about a crisis as it's happening. This is a live crisis, not an earthquake. It's not refugees moved across the border. We're trying to help people while there's bombs raining down from the sky, while there are troops on the ground, while there's bombardment from the sea. It's unprecedented. It's unprecedented, and it's impossible. The reality is it's impossible.
Nour, spell out for me the challenges of even getting resources to your people inside Gaza. How can you do it?
Without a ceasefire, we basically will not be able to do it. We need the bombing to stop in order for our teams, in order for all organizations and agencies' teams to be able to deliver aid. That's the number one factor that needs to be in place to ensure the safety of everyone that's delivering aid, but also people who are receiving aid. And then, as was mentioned by my colleagues, what's needed is also an increase in the amount of aid that goes into Gaza. If fuel continues to be excluded, we will also not be able to operate distribution mechanisms. If we are to distribute in trucks run on fuel. We do not have fuel in Gaza today, so we will not be able to distribute. That's very essential today. And the 500 plus trucks that have entered so far did not include fuel. Fuel is restricted. We also need more funding to the crisis. We need more funding to the emergency response. Today, there can be no freezing of funds going into Palestine. This needs to continue and to be upscaled and to be topped up and to reach local Palestinian civil society organizations. And the aid needs to flow from south to north and from north to south. It cannot be concentrated in the south only.
Nour, many people will be watching and feeling completely helpless in all of this. What can people be doing in terms of supporting a charity like yours that is actively working on the ground and doing its utmost for people?
We need to be all calling together for a ceasefire. We need to put pressure, popular pressure, on governments to call for a ceasefire, to put mechanisms in place to ensure that there's a long-lasting ceasefire that would allow first people to stop getting bombed, and then for the aid to get into Gaza today. That's the most important thing anyone can do today, call for a ceasefire.
James, are we at a stage now where it's getting so dangerous in Gaza that Western aid agencies will just think, we don't want to lose any more of our people here, let's get them out?
Well, if they were to think that, there's still the question about how they could get them out, because there's not very many people leaving Gaza. There's been a handful of people with severe injury. There's been a handful of dual nationals. But I think all aid agencies that I'm aware of are thinking about how to scale up when they can, when it's safe enough to do so. There's already been, of course, ingenious types of aid being delivered. The Jordanians had an airdrop of medical supplies. There's talk of opening a sea route to Cyprus, which is 1,000 miles away to Gaza. But of course, there are very well established crossings with Israel that can be opened again, and depending on the nature of the damage at those crossings, of course. But there is a vast amount of need, and there's a vast amount of interest in this conflict globally. So if there is some form of humanitarian ceasefire, we and all the other agencies involved can scale up hugely. But at the moment, it is incredibly difficult to do so.
Well, James, you mentioned the airdrop earlier this week. King Abdullah II of Jordan said that his country's Air Force had airdropped urgent medical aid to a field hospital operated by the kingdom in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military confirmed this unusual move and that it had been coordinated with them. Do you think this could be a new way of getting aid into Gaza then, James?
Well, put simply, no. The Gaza Strip is the population of Paris. You can't supply Paris if it's been under attack for a month with airdropped aid, and even trucked aid doesn't do it. And so we talk about the 500 a day pre-conflict average. Well, of course, that need will be vastly more now. It'll be 1,000 trucks a day needed, but that is nowhere near what we're getting. But without electricity and fuel and water being kind of continuously put into a large population that is obviously with desperate needs, we are talking about the things that we're seeing now becoming worse, whether that's the entire population having diarrhea, whether that's people having to drink seawater or having operations that anesthetic. There are a million of these anecdotes of suffering, and this is what it looks like when we have this degree of restriction on our aid access with this degree of intensity of violence.
Mabrur, how close to empty then is Gaza in terms of resources? I mean, hours, days?
I think it's empty. I mean, it's running. The last hospital that I'm aware of that's still running life-saving kind of surgeries and procedures is hours away. 11 of the 11 universities in Gaza have been bombed. The schools are not operating. The roads are bombed and destroyed. Gaza's been split into two. There is nothing left.
And this is deliberate, obviously.
Of course. I mean, I think the idea of North Gaza and South Gaza, that's a very obvious tactic. It's a political tactic. It's a military tactic. It's a colonizer's tactic. You know, South Gaza is probably what will be remaining of Gaza Strip once this conflict ends. But we're talking about a very besieged people, a very traumatized people, and it's empty. The reality is it's empty. You know, we are still operating in Gaza. We're operating on scraps. It's absolute scraps.
But let me get this right. You've material ready and waiting to go. You just need that Rafah border crossing to open.
Absolutely. I think, so far as I'm aware, and Nour and James can also clarify this, there are possibly thousands of trucks ready at the Egypt-Rafah border. You know, there are huge organizations around the world ready. They have the money ready. They have the resources ready. They have the equipment ready. But unless that opens...
So just to be clear, who controls that crossing? Just for our viewers' perspective, who controls that crossing?
Ultimately, Israel.
Right.
Ultimately, Israel. Of course, it's an Egyptian and an Israeli crossing, but essentially it's Israel. If Israel says that it will allow that crossing to open, then Egypt is also ready to open that crossing.
So what's the game plan here with that crossing, do you feel, from the Israeli view? What did it...
I think it's quite obvious that from the beginning, the game plan was, let's move all of the civilian population into the Sinai. Right? Egypt's not having that. And as a result of Egypt not having that, that's where we have this blockade now in place, essentially. If you make the people desperate enough, they'll find a way through. And I think that's the next awaited tactic, it's the next strategized tactic. But we're going to see thousands of lives lost. We're going to see thousands of lives lost in the next 7 to 10 days simply from starvation.
Not from bombing, not from
the
aerial...
hygiene situation, from the diarrhea situation, from the unattended medical situation, from the starvation situation. Just from that alone, if this carries on for another 10 days in the same way, without that opening, we're going to see thousands more deaths.
Nour, is that what you're hearing from your people on the ground as well, that it's utterly dire?
It is utterly dire. Nowhere is safe. They have no access to basic needs for survival. And we have to remember that it's true that the escalation started on October 7. However, Gaza has been under blockade for over 16 years. So there needs to be an addressing of the root causes as well of what's happening today in Gaza. And as violence is increasing, if we do not find lasting solutions for the people of Gaza and for peace in the region, we will continue to see violence, people dying, people killed, and more people not being able to access food, starve, yes. And Oxfam has released recently a statement on using starvation as a weapon of war, which is illegal under international law. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Gaza today.
Nour, is the airdrop option open to Oxfam at all, or was that just a one-off?
Airdrops are not going to be enough, as James mentioned. Airdrops are going to be very minimal and will require a lot of coordination. By the time airdrops are going to have minimal effect if they arrive into Gaza.
James, just looking ahead to the next 10 days, what's your prediction in terms of what Save the Children will be allowed to do? Not what you want to do, but what you might be allowed to achieve.
Well, the only positive, if you want to call it that, is that there is, I think, increasing recognition amongst international political leaders that what we're seeing is a humanitarian crisis that they need to tackle. That's something that we're hearing, whether it's from the US Secretary of State or in discussions in the Security Council in New York. So I think understanding the problem is the first step in addressing it, realizing that, as many states have already said, you need to open more border crossings, you need to switch on sustainable water supplies. That is the very basics, and it can be done in a short amount of time, really. It doesn't require the weeks that we've had in the waiting to get Rafah back to any form of opening. So I think that can show us that this is a man-made problem that needs man-made solutions, and we shouldn't forget that.
Thanks, James. Mabrur, how determined are you and your people to keep going?
We will keep going. That's an absolute given. We'll keep going so far as there's a need, and there is going to be a need. We will absolutely keep going. The question is, how long can we keep going? That's the real question. Right now, like I said to you before, we're working on scraps. I mean, even this morning we were delivering hot food. There's going to be a time in the next 10 days when we won't have access to any more. And I'm fearful of that moment. That will be a devastating moment. It will be a black day in history for humanity when that moment comes, when organizations who have the ability simply can't anymore.
And your people are obviously fatigued, traumatized. You've lost one colleague already. I mean, they've been through hell for the last month.
I mean, my team is split in two at the moment. Half of them are they are the refugees themselves. They're going from one abandoned school to another abandoned school.
And that's where they're living?
That's where they're living. They're not operational at the moment, and of course they shouldn't be either. I have another few members who are still more or less operational. It's becoming impossible to find fuel, to run trucks, to do anything in any sort of scale. We're absolutely dependent on that border opening, that crossing opening. And let's be clear, right? There's not only one way in, right? It doesn't have to be from Rafah only. We're not talking about a poverty-stricken country in Israel. We're talking about one of the largest, economies in the world.
Very wealthy country.
Very wealthy. This could turn around in moments. If a few of the other openings happened, There are a few other openings around the Gaza Strip. If they were opened and there were some trucks sent in, this isn't the crisis that it needs to be. Sometimes I think it's and it's really important what James said at the very last moment. We have to remember that this is not an earthquake. This is not a flood. This is not a God-forsaken crisis. This is a man-made crisis. This is a war. This can stop. This can be turned around. But there's no will at this moment in time.
At what point do you think someone somewhere in the Israeli leadership will say, enough?
I don't think it's coming from Israel, personally. I've been working in the human rights field for 20 years. It's not coming from Israel. It's going to come from the international community. And it's very important.
So hang on, so you think someone like America basically says, enough now?
I think they're the paymasters, right? So I think they're the ones who are the obvious choice to say enough. I don't think it's going to come from America either. I think it's going to be from the will of the common person, the everyday person. I think it's quite clear as day for the whole world to see that what's happening to the Palestinians is an absolute crime against humanity. And I'm not talking about in the legal term. I'm talking about from a humanistic perspective. It's a crime against humanity to continue a bombardment against a vulnerable civilian population.
Nour, James and Mabrur, thank you all for your input today. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for me, Enda Brady and all of the team here, thank you and goodbye.